For more than 100 years, the NCAA operated on a principle it called amateurism. The idea was simple. College athletes compete for the love of the game, for the scholarship, for the experience, not for money. Any athlete who accepted payment, a sponsorship, an endorsement, even a free meal from a local restaurant, risked losing their eligibility on the spot. The NCAA called it tradition. Critics called it something else entirely. Because while athletes were forbidden from profiting off their own names, the NCAA was not. The organization generated over $1 billion in revenue per year. Universities built palatial training facilities, hired coaches on 8-figure contracts, and sold jerseys with players' numbers, without paying a cent to the people wearing those numbers. The system was legally airtight, institutionally enforced, and, for decades, virtually unchallenged. That ended in June 2021. On June 21, 2021, the United States Supreme Court issued a unanimous 9-0 decision against the NCAA in the case known as NCAA versus Alston. The court ruled that the NCAA's restrictions on education-related compensation violated federal antitrust law. In a separate concurring opinion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh went further, writing that the NCAA's broader amateurism model likely could not survive antitrust scrutiny. His words were blunt. Nowhere else in America can businesses get away with agreeing not to pay their workers a fair market rate. 9 days later, on July 1, 2021, the NCAA adopted an interim NIL policy: name, image, and likeness. From that date forward, college athletes were permitted to profit from their own identities. They could sign endorsement deals, charge for autographs, promote products on social media, start businesses. The 100-year prohibition was over. Like and subscribe if you're new here. This story is still unfolding in real time. Hit the bell. What happened next was not what most people expected. The conventional wisdom was that football and men's basketball would dominate the new NIL economy. After all, those were the highest-profile college sports, the ones with massive television audiences and rabid fan bases. And those sports did benefit. Star quarterbacks and point guards commanded deals worth over $1 million within months of the policy change. But NIL did something unexpected for women's sports. It rewarded something women athletes had quietly been building for years, a direct relationship with their audiences. In an era when women's college games rarely appeared on major television networks, when highlight packages were minimal and coverage was an afterthought, female athletes had turned to social media. Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, these were the platforms where women's sports actually lived, where fans followed athletes not just as competitors, but as people. That relationship, built slowly and without institutional support, suddenly had a dollar figure attached to it. Paige Bueckers was the first to make history. The UConn point guard, then just a freshman, signed an endorsement deal with Gatorade in September 2021, becoming the first active college athlete to receive a Gatorade sponsorship in the company's history. Bueckers had been the consensus top recruit in the country coming out of high school, a player with genuine star power and a social media following that predated the NIL era. Gatorade saw what traditional sports media had been slow to acknowledge, that women's college basketball had an audience worth reaching. Bueckers was not alone for long. At LSU, gymnast Livvy Dunne was becoming something the sports world had not quite seen before. A Division I athlete who had cultivated a massive social media presence, more than 4 million Instagram followers, and more than 7 million TikTok followers while still competing in college, Dunne was, in the language of the new economy, an influencer with a sport attached. That was not a criticism. It was the blueprint. NIL valuations tracked by platforms like On3 placed Dunne at number 1 overall in college athletics multiple times between 2022 and 2024. Her estimated annual NIL value exceeded $3 million. A gymnast, not a quarterback. And then there was Caitlin Clark. By the time Clark's junior and senior seasons at Iowa reached national attention, She was not merely a college basketball player. She was a television event. Her scoring records, her range, her personality, all of it translated into an audience that networks noticed when ratings for women's college games climbed to levels not seen in decades. Clark's NIL portfolio reflected that reality. Nike, Gatorade, State Farm, Goldman Sachs. Before she played a single professional game, before the WNBA held its draft lottery, estimates placed her college NIL earnings between $3 and $5 million. To put that number in context, the average WNBA salary in 2024 was approximately $117,000. Clark had already earned multiples of that while in college. Angel Reese presented a different version of the same story. At LSU, where she played alongside a nationally televised championship run in 2023, Reese built brand partnerships with Fusion Beauty, Raising Cane's, and several other companies. Her approach to NIL was unapologetic and deliberate. She understood that her visibility, her personality, and her willingness to be a public figure were assets. When she became a subject of national controversy after the 2023 championship, both her own NIL portfolio and Clark's grew in the aftermath. Controversy in the NIL era is a form of visibility. This was the new reality of college sports. Personality, platform, and brand deals had become linked in ways the NCAA's old model never anticipated. But NIL did not solve every problem. It introduced new ones. The same forces that elevated Clark, Bueckers, Dunne, and Reese also created a sharply unequal landscape. Athletes at major programs with large media markets and boosted NIL collectives, organizations formed by donors specifically to fund athlete deals, had access to opportunities that athletes at smaller schools simply did not. The transfer portal, which allowed athletes to change schools without sitting out a year, combined with NIL to create an open market that wealthier programs consistently won. Critics argued that NIL had not liberated athletes so much as it had restructured the exploitation, moving it from institutional to market-based. A handful of athletes were earning millions. The vast majority were earning nothing or close to it. The promise of NIL was equal opportunity. The reality was that it rewarded existing platform, existing fame, and existing access, and the rules were still being written. In 2024, a federal settlement in the case known as House versus NCAA moved the landscape again. The agreement, worth approximately $2.8 billion over 10 years, established a framework for schools to share revenue directly with athletes, not through third-party NIL deals, but through direct institutional payments, capped at roughly $20 million per school per year. For the first time in the history of American college sports, universities were preparing to pay their athletes as a formal part of the economic model. What this means for women's sports in the long run remains genuinely uncertain. Direct revenue sharing historically flows toward the sports that generate the most institutional revenue, which, in most schools, means football and men's basketball. If the new model simply replicates those power dynamics at a larger scale, women's sports could find themselves at the same disadvantage they occupied before NIL, only with higher stakes. But the NIL era proved something important. It proved that women athletes, given equal access to economic tools, were not waiting around to be discovered by television executives. They had built their own audiences. They had cultivated their own brands. The market, when finally allowed to function, found them. The question now is whether the institutions that govern college sports will build a system that honors that reality, or repeat the mistake of 100 years of telling female athletes that their value was someone else's to determine. That debate is happening in courtrooms, on campuses, and in boardrooms right now. What we know is that the women who were told to play for free didn't just survive the moment the rules changed. They ran toward it. If you want to understand how we got here and what the fights ahead might look like, this channel is where that story lives. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.